do that as well. How you guys doing tonight? Oh, it's going to be an interesting night. A couple days after the fourth anniversary of the Thursday night show, the brain is still not working real well. Hope everyone's doing well. I am Joel K underscore OG. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Every Sunday night, live here on Twitch and being translated over in about an hour or so afterwards over to YouTube. And we welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to 2026. We've got a lot of big things coming up for the show this year. Got some good short stories. We've got some movies. We've got some brand new books that we will be introducing to you. Some of you may have read when you guys were younger or when you guys were going to the library and reading them. And we'll make that big announcement. And you guys already know the big announcement. You guys have been following me. You guys know the first book in 2 weeks for the third anniversary of this show coming up will be based on a movie. Well, actually, no. The movie came second because the movie was based on the books. Kind of works that way. And we've got some pretty good things going on tonight. By the way, we do have a new email for everybody to say hi, hello, how you doing? Joel K underscore OG at protonmail.com. I want to thank everybody who wrote in last Friday and yesterday. For those who survived like I did the 14 hours of New Year's Eve here on the channel. And thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed the movies. It was something we wanted to do for you guys after all these years, is have just a fun marathon. Previous years, I, on the other show, welcomed from the start of New Year's in South Pacific all the way west. This year, with some conversations with my executive producer, we decided that, it was going to be just something a little more mellow. Something a little bit more mellow. And we thought, let's do some movies. If this lousy weather, you guys could sit back, chill out, relax, and enjoy the movies. And I'm glad you did. I'm glad you guys stopped in. Greatly appreciated. You guys noticed we did do 2 segments of the classic movies because, well, my hard drive was screaming at me, so I thought, well, I'd better cut it short. And knowing how Twitch is for long format programming, we decided to cut it into 2 segments, and they still haven't taken me down yet. Ha! And so I'm kind of excited by that. Tonight, we've got 2 very good short stories coming up. We have a request. Someone requested a short story we did back in July, and I said, sure, why not? Let's do it. And we have something new. So this will be a semi-long show tonight, about an hour and a half. Yeah, give or take. See how long it gets through the one story and the other. By the way, when you guys get a chance to please like and subscribe, it helps us out 110%. Like that special effect, like woo. And just love having you guys just stop in, like and subscribe here on Twitch and on YouTube. Remember, one thing that we do not do here is we don't play games. We have a lot of fun, but we don't do Patreon, and we don't do, I'm just doing this for fun. I mean, maybe someday I will. We'll see how it goes. But I kind of like just doing the show without putting pressure on people to watch and just chill and relax. Tonight, we have 2 short stories for you. The first one, starting things off, is something brand new for the channel. This one is titled The Rival Ghosts by Brander Matthews. You guys can find this in a lot of conglomerations, compilations of short stories and ghost short stories. And this was kind of after New Year's and the ghosts of Christmas that have come and gone for another year. Thought this might be a lot of fun for you guys to enjoy. So, without further ado, let us get started with Brander Matthews. Oops. Brander Matthews, The Rival Ghosts, here on Accessibly Live, the Book Club Reading Room. The good ship sped on her way across the calm Atlantic. It was an outward passage according to the little charts which the company had charily distributed, but most of the passengers were homeward bound after a summer of rest and recreation, and they were counting the days before they might hope to see the Fire Island light. On the lee side of the boat, comfortably sheltered from the wind, just by the door of the captain's room, which was theirs during the day, sat a little group of returning Americans. The Duchess, she was down on the purser's list as Mrs. Martin, but her friends and familiars called her the Duchess of Washington Square. But Baby Van Rensselaer, she was quite old enough to vote, and had her sex been entitled to do that duty, but she was the younger of two sisters. She was still the baby of the family. The Duchess and Baby Van Rensselaer were discussing the pleasant English voice and the not unpleasant English accent of a manly young lordling who was going to America for sport. Uncle Larry and Dear Jones were enticing each other into a bet on the ship's run of the morrow. "I'll give you 2-1 she doesn't make 420, said Dear Jones. "I'll take that," answered Uncle Larry. "We made 427 the 5th day of this last year." It was Uncle Larry's 17th visit to Europe, and this was therefore his 34th voyage. "And when did you get in?" asked Baby Van Rensselaer. "I don't care a bit about the run, so long as we get it soon. We crossed the bar Sunday night, just 7 days after we left Queenstown, and we dropped anchor off Quarantine at 3 o'clock on Monday morning. I hope we shan't do this time. I can't seem to sleep any when the boat stops." "I can, but I didn't," continued Uncle Larry, "'cause my stateroom was the most forward in the boat, and the donkey engine that let down the anchor was right over my head." "So you got up, saw the sunrise over the bay, Dear Jones," said Dear Jones, "with the electric lights of the city twinkling in the distance, and the first faint flush of the dawn in the east just over Fort Lafayette, and the rosy tinge which spread softly upward and—" "Did you both come back together?" asked the Duchess. "Because he had crossed 34 times, you must not suppose that he has a monopoly on sunrises," retorted Dear Jones. "No, this was my own surprise, and a mighty pretty one it was, too." "I'm not matching sunrises with you," remarked Uncle Larry calmly, "but I'm willing to back a merry jest called forth by my sunrise against any 2 merry jests called forth by yours." "I confess reluctantly that my sunrise evoked no merry jest at all." Dear Jones was an honest man, and would scorn the invent of a merry jest on the spur of the moment. "That's where my sunrise has the call," said Uncle Larry complacently. "What was the merry jest?" was Baby Van Rensselaer's inquiry, the natural result of feminine curiosity thus artistically excited. "Well, here it is. I was standing aft near a patriotic American and a wandering Irishman, and the patriotic American rashly declared that you couldn't see a sunrise like that anywhere in Europe, and this gave the Irishman his chance, and he said, 'Sure, you have not been here till you've been through 'em over there.'" "It is true," said Dear Jones thoughtfully, "that they do have some things over there better than we do, for instances." umbrellas. And gowns, added the Duchess, and antiquities. This was Uncle Larry's contribution. And we do have some things so much better in America, protested Baby Van Rensselaer, as yet uncorroborated by any worship of the effigy monarchies of the despotic Europe. We make a lot of things a great deal nicer than you can get in Europe, especially ice cream. And pretty girls, added Dear Jones, but he did not look at her. And spooks, remarked Uncle Larry casually. Spooks? Inquired the Duchess. Spooks. I maintain the word. Ghosts, if you like that better, or specters. We turn out better quality of spook. You forget the lovely ghost stories about the Rhine and the Black Forest, interrupted Miss Van Rensselaer with feminine inconsistency. I remember the Rhine and the Black Forest and all the other haunts of elves and fairies and hobgoblins, but for good honest spooks there is no place like home. And what differentiates our spooks, Spiritus Americanus, from the ordinary ghosts of literature is that it responds to the American sense of humor. Take Irving's stories, for example. The Headless Horseman, that comic ghost story, and Rip Van Winkle. Consider what humor, and what good humor, there is in telling of his meeting with the goblin crew of Hendrik Hudson's men. A still better example of this is American way of dealing with legend and mystery is a marvelous tale of rival ghosts. The rival ghosts? Inquired the Duchess and Van Rensselaer together. Who were they? Didn't I ever tell you about them? Answered Uncle Larry, a gleam of approaching joy flashing in his eye. Since he is bound to tell us sooner or later, we'd better be resigned and hear it now, said Dear Jones. If you're not more eager, I won't tell you at all. Oh, do, Uncle Larry. You know I do dote on ghost stories, pleaded Miss Van Rensselaer. Once upon a time, began Uncle Larry, in fact, a very few years ago, there lived in the thriving town of New York a young American called Duncan Ephelet. Ephelet Duncan. Like his name, he was half Yankee and half Scotch. And naturally, he was a lawyer and had come to New York to make his way. His father was a Scotsman, and he came over and settled in Boston and married a Salem girl. When Ephelet Duncan was about 20, he lost both his parents. His father left him with enough money to give him a start, then a strong feeling of pride in his Scots birth. You see, there was a title in the family in Scotland, and although Ephelet's father was the younger son of a younger son, he had always remembered and was always bade on only as to remember that his ancestry was noble. His mother left him her full share of Yankee grit and a little house in Salem which had belonged to her family for more than 200 years. She was a Hitchcock, and the Hitchcocks had been settled in Salem since the year 1. It was a great-great-grandfather of Mr. Ephelet Hitchcock, who was the foremost in the time of the Salem witchcraft craze. And this little old house, which was left to my friend Elephant Duncan, was haunted by the ghosts of one of the witches, I of course interrupted Dear Jones. Now, how could it be a ghost of a witch, since the witches were all burned at the stake? You've never heard of anyone who was burned by having a ghost, did you? That's an argument in favor of cremation, at any rate, replied Jones, evading a direct question. It is, if you do not like ghosts. I do, said Van Rensselaer. And so do I, added Uncle Larry. I love a ghost as dearly as an Englishman loves a lord. Go on with your story, said the Duchess, majestically overruling all extraneous discussion. This little old house in Salem was haunted, resumed Uncle Larry, and by a very distinguished ghost, or at least by a ghost with a very remarkable attributes. What was he like? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer with a premonitory shiver of anticipatory delight. It had a lot of peculiarities. In the first place, it never appeared to the master of the house. Mostly, it confined its visitations to unwelcome guests. In the course of the last 100 years, it had frightened away 4 successive mother-in-laws, and while never intruding on the head of the household. I guess that ghost has been one of the boys when he was alive in flesh. This was Dear Jones' contribution to telling this tale. In the second place, continued Uncle Larry, it never frightened anybody the first time it appeared. But they were scared enough for twice, and they rarely mustered up courage enough to risk a third interview. One of the most curious characteristics of this well-meaning spook was that it had no face, or at least that nobody ever saw its face. Perhaps he kept his countenance veiled, queried the Duchess, who was beginning to remember that she never did like ghost stories. That was what I was never able to find out. I have never asked several people who saw ghosts, and none of them could tell me anything about its face. And yet, while in its presence, they never noticed its features. And they never remarked on their absence or concealment. It was only afterwards, when they tried to recall calmly all the circumstances of the meeting with the mysterious stranger, that they became aware that they had not seen its face. They could not say whether the features were covered, or whether they were wanting, or that it was troubled was. They knew only that the face was never seen, and no matter how often they might see it, they have never fathomed this mystery. To this day, nobody knows whether the ghost which used to haunt the little house in Salem had a face, or what manner of face it had. How awfully weird, said Baby Van Rensselaer. And why did the ghost go away? I haven't said it went away, answered Uncle Larry with much dignity. But you said it used to haunt the little house at Salem, so I supposed it moved, didn't it? You shall be told in due time. Eliphalet Duncan used to spend most of the summer vacations at Salem, and the ghost never bothered him at all, for he was the master of the house, much to his disgust, too, because he wanted to see for himself the mysterious tenant at will of his property. But he never saw it. Never. He arranged with friends to call him whenever it might appear, and he slept in the next room with the door open, and whenever their frightened cries awakened him, the ghost was gone, and his only reward was to hear reproachful sighs as soon as he went back to bed. You see, the ghost thought it was not fair for Eliphalet to seek an introduction which was plainly unwelcome. Dear Jones interrupted the storyteller by getting up and tucking a heavy rug snugly around Baby Van Rensselaer's feet, for the sky was now overcast and gray, and the air was damp and penetrating. One fine spring morning, pursued Uncle Larry, Duncan received great news. I have told you that there was title in the family in Scotland, and that Eliphalet's father was the younger son of the younger son. Well, it happened that all Eliphalet's father's brothers and uncles had died off without male issues, except the eldest son of the eldest, and he, of course, bore the title and was Baron Duncan of Duncan. Now the great news of Eliphalet's Duncan received in New York one fine spring morning was that Baron Duncan and his only son had been yachting in the Hebrides and they had been caught up in a black squall and were both dead. So my friend Duncan inherited the title and the estates. How romantic, said the Duchess. So he was a baron. Well, answered Uncle Larry, he was a baron if he chose, but he didn't choose. More fool he, said Dear Jones sententiously. Well, answered Uncle Larry, I'm not sure of that. You see, Duncan was half Scotch and half Yankee, and he had two eyes to the main chance. He held his tongue about his windfall of luck until he could find out whether the Scott estates were enough to keep up the Scots title. He soon discovered that they were not, and that the late Lord Duncan, having married money, kept up the estate so he could out of revenue of the dowry of Lady Duncan. And Eliphalet, he decided, would be rather a well-fed lawyer in New York, living comfortably on his practice, than a starving lord in Scotland, living scantily on his title. But he kept his title? Asked the Duchess. Well, answered Uncle Larry, he kept it quiet. I knew it, and a friend or two. But he was a sight too smart to put Baron Duncan of Duncan, attorney and counselor of law, on his shingle. What was all this got to do with your ghost? Asked Dear Jones pertinently. Nothing with the ghost, but a good deal with another ghost. Eliphalet was very learned in spirit lore, perhaps because he owned a haunted house in Salem, perhaps because he was a Scotsman by descent. At all events, he had made a special study of the race and the white ladies and the banshees and the bogies of all kinds, in saying and doing and warnings of recorded in the annals of Scottish nobility. In fact, he was acquainted with the habits of every reputable spook in Scottish peerage, and he knew that there was a Duncan ghost attached to the person of the holder of the title of Baron Duncan of Duncan. So besides being a owner of a haunted house in Salem, he was also a haunted man in Scotland, asked Baby Van Rensselaer. Just so. But the Scots ghost was not unpleasant, like the Salem ghost, although it had one peculiarity in common with the transatlantic fellow spook. It never appeared to the holder of the title, just as the other never was visible to the owner of the house. In fact, the Duncan ghost was never seen at all. It was a guardian angel only. Its sole duty was to be in personal attendance on Baron Duncan of Duncan, and to warn him of impending evil. The traditions of the house told that the barons of Duncan had again and again felt a premonition of ill fortune. Some of them had yielded and withdrawn from the ventures they had undertaken, and it failed dismally. Some had been obstinate and hardened their hearts, and had gone on reckless of defeat and to death. In no case had a Lord Duncan been exposed to peril without fair warning. Then how came it that the father and son were lost on the yacht off the Hebrides? Asked Dear Jones. Because they were too enlightened to yield to superstition. That is extant now the letter of Lord Duncan, written to his wife a few minutes before he and his son set sail, into which he tells her how hard it has to struggle with an almost overmastering desire to give up the trip. Had he obeyed the friendly warning of the family ghost, the latter would have been spared a journey across the Atlantic. Did the ghost leave Scotland for America as soon as the old baron died? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer with much interest. How did he come over, Dear Jones? In steerage or cabin passenger? I don't know, answered Uncle Larry calmly, and Eliphalet didn't know. For as he was in no danger, and stood in no need of warning, he could not tell whether the ghost was on duty or not. Of course, he was on the watch for all the time, but he never got any proof of the presence until he went down to the little house in Salem just before 4th of July. He took a friend down with him, a young fellow who had been in the regular army since the day Fort Sumter was fired on, and who thought that after 4 years of little unpleasantness down south, including 6 months in Libya, and after 10 years of fighting against the natives on the plains, he wasn't likely to be much frightened by a ghost. Well, Eliphalet and the officer sat out on the porch all the evening, smoking and talking over points of military law. A little after 12 o'clock, just as they began to think about time to turn in, they heard in the most ghastly noise in the house. It wasn't a shriek or a howl, or a yell, or anything that could put a name to it. It was an undeterminate, inexplicable shiver and shudder of sound which went wailing out of the window. The officer had been at Cold Harbor, but he had felt himself getting colder at this time. Eliphalet knew that it was the ghost who haunted this house. As this weird sound died away, it was followed by another sharp, short, blood-curdling in intensity. Something in this cry seemed familiar to Eliphalet, and he felt sure that it proceeded from the family ghost, a warning wraith of the Duncans. "Do I understand you to intimate that both ghosts were there together?" inquired the Duchess anxiously. "Both of them were there," answered Uncle Larry. "You see, one of them belonged to the house, and the other all the time, and the other was attached to the person of the Baron Duncan, and had to follow him there, whether he had been there as the ghost also. But Eliphalet, he had scarcely time to think this out when he heard both sounds again, not one after another, but both together, and something told him, some sort of instinct had, that these two ghosts didn't agree, didn't get on together, and didn't exactly hit it off. In fact, they were quarreling. "Quarreling ghosts? Well, I never," said Baby Van Rensselaer remarked. "And it's a blessed thing to see ghosts dwell together in unity," said Dear Jones. And the Duchess added, "And it would certainly be setting a better example." "You know," resumed Uncle Larry, "the two waves of light or sound may interfere or produce darkness or silence. So it was with these two rival spooks. They interfered, but they did not produce silence or darkness. On the contrary, as soon as Eliphalet and the officer went into the house, there began once a series of spiritualistic manifestations, a regular dark seance. A tambourine began to played upon, a bell was rung, and a flaming banjo went singing across the room." "Where did they get the banjo?" asked Dear Jones skeptically. "I don't know. Materialized it, maybe. Just that they did the tambourine. You don't suppose a quiet New York lawyer kept a stock of musical instruments large enough to fit out a strolling minstrel troupe, just on the chance a pair of ghosts coming to give him a surprise party, do you? Every spook has its own instrument of torture. Angels play on harps, I'm informed, and spirits enjoy the banjos and tambourines. These spooks of Eliphalet Duncans were ghosts of all the modern improvements, and I guess they were capable of providing their own musical weapons. At all events, they had them there in the little house at Salem the night Eliphalet and his friend came down. And they played on them, and they rang the bell, and they rapped here and there and everywhere, and they kept it up all night." "All night?" asked an awe-stricken Duchess, all night long, said Uncle Larry solemnly. And the next night, too. Elfella did not get a wink of sleep. Neither did his friend. On the second night, the house ghost was seen by the officer. On the third night, it showed itself again. And the third morning, the officer packed up his gripsack and took for the first train to Boston. He was a New Yorker, but he said he'd sooner go to Boston than to see that ghost again. Elphalet, he wasn't scared at all, partially because he never saw either the domiciliary or the titular spook, and partially because he felt himself on friendly terms with the spirit world and didn't scare easily. But after losing 3 nights of sleeps and the society of his friend, he began to be a little impatient and to think that there is something that had gone far enough. You see, while in a way he was fond of ghosts, yet he liked them the best one at a time. 2 ghosts were one too many. He wasn't bent on making a collection of spooks. He and 1 ghost were company, but he and 2 ghosts were a crowd. What did he do? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer. Well, he couldn't do anything. He waited a while, hoping that they would get tired, but he got tired out first. You see, it comes natural to a spook to sleep in the daytime, but a man wants to sleep at night, and they wouldn't let him sleep nights. They kept on wrangling and quarreling incessantly. They manifested their dark seance as regularly as the old clock on the stairs struck 12. They rapped and they rang bells and they banged on the tambourines and they threw the flaming banjo about the house, and worse than all, they swore. I didn't know spirits were addicted to bad language, said the Duchess. How did he know they were swearing? Could he hear them? Asked Dear Jones. That was just it, responded Uncle Larry. He could not hear them, at least not distinctly. There were inarticulate murmurs and stifled grumblings, but the impression produced on him was that they were swearing. If they had only sworn right out, he would have not minded it, of course, because he had have known the worst. But the feeling that the air was full of suppressed profanity was very wearing, and after standing it for a week, he gave up in disgust and went to the White Mountains. Leave them to fight it out, I suppose, interjected Baby Van Rensselaer. Not at all, explained Uncle Larry. They could not quarrel unless he was present. You see, he could not leave the titular ghost behind him, and the domiciliary ghost could not leave the house. When he went away, he took the family ghost with him, leaving the house ghost behind. Now, spooks can't quarrel when they're 100 miles apart any more than men can. And what happened afterward? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer with pretty impatience. A marvelous thing happened. Elfella Duncan went to the White Mountains, and in the car of the railroad that ran to the top of Mount Washington, he met a classmate who he had not seen in years. And this classmate introduced Duncan to his sister, and his sister was a remarkably pretty girl. And Duncan fell in love with her at first sight, and by the time he got to the top of Mount Washington, he was so deep in love, he began to consider his own unworthiness, and to wonder whether she might ever be induced to care for him a little, ever so little. I don't think that is so marvelous a thing, said Dear Jones, glancing at Baby Van Rensselaer. Who was she? Asked Duchess, who had once lived in Pennsylvania. She was Miss Kitty Sutton of San Francisco, and she was the daughter of old Judge Sutton of the firm Pixley and Sutton. A very respectable family, assented the Duchess. I hope she wasn't a daughter of that loud and vulgar old Mrs. Sutton, who we met at Saratoga one summer 4 or 5 years ago, said Dear Jones. Probably she was. She was a horrid old woman. The boys used to call her Mother Gorgon. The pretty Kitty Sutton, with whom Elephant Duncan had fallen in love with, was the daughter of Mother Gorgon. But he never saw the mother, who was in Frisco or Los Angeles or Santa Fe or somewhere out west, and he saw a great deal of the daughter, who was up in the White Mountains. She was traveling with her brother and his wife. As they journeyed from hotel to hotel, Duncan went with them and filled out the quartet. Before the end of the summer, he began to think about proposing. Of course, he had lots of chances, going on excursions as they were every day. He made up his mind to seize the first opportunity, and that very evening he took her out for a moonlit row on Lake Wispanogi. As he handed her into the boat, he resolved to do it, and he had a glimmer of a suspicion that she knew he was going to do it too. Girls, said Dear Jones, never go out in a rowboat at night with a young man unless you mean to accept him. Sometimes it's best to refuse him and get it over once and for all, said Baby Van Rensselaer. As Eliphalet took the oars, he felt a sudden chill. He tried to shake it off, but in vain. He began to have a growing suspicion of impending evil. Before he had taken 10 strokes, he was a swift oarsman, he was aware of a mysterious presence between him and Miss Sutton. Was it the guardian angel warning him of the match? Interrupted Dear Jones. That's just what it was, said Uncle Larry, and he yielded to it, and he kept his peace and rowed Miss Sutton back to the hotel with his proposal unspoken. More fool he, said Dear Jones, and he will take more than one ghost to keep me from proposing when my mind is made up. He looked at Baby Van Rensselaer. The next morning, continued Uncle Larry, Eliphalet overslept himself, and when he went down to a late breakfast, he found that the Suttons had gone to New York by the morning train. He wanted to follow them at once, and again he felt the mysterious presence overpowering his will. He struggled 2 days, and at last he roused himself to do what he wanted in spite of the spook. When he arrived in New York, it was late in the evening. He dressed himself hastily and went to the hotel where the Suttons put up, in the hope of seeing at least her brother. The guardian angel fought every inch of the walk with him until he began to wonder whether if Miss Sutton were to take him, the spook would forbid the banns. At the hotel, he saw that no one at night, and he went home determined to call as early as he could the next morning and make end of it. When he left the office about 2 o'clock, and next day he learned his fate. He had not walked 5 blocks before he discovered that the wraith of the Duncans had withdrawn his opposition to the suit. There was no feeling of impending evil, no resistance, no struggle, no consciousness of an opposing presence. Eliphalet was greatly encouraged. He walked briskly to the hotel, and he found Miss Sutton alone. He asked her the question. He got his answer. She accepted him, of course, said Baby Van Rensselaer. Of course, said Uncle Larry. And while they were in the first flush of joy, swapping confidences and confessions, her brother came into the parlor with an expression of pain on his face and a telegram in his hand. The former was caused by the latter, which was from Frisco, which announced the sudden death of Mrs. Sutton, their mother. And that was why the ghost no longer opposed the match, questioned Dear Jones. Exactly. You see, the family ghost knew that Mother Gorgon was an awful obstacle to Duncan's happiness, and so it warned him. But the moment the obstacle was removed, it gave its consent at once. The fog was lowering its thick, damp curtain and it began to be difficult to see from one end of the boat to the other. Dear Jones tightened the rug which wrapped baby Van Rensselaer, and then withdrew it again into his own substantial coverings. Uncle Larry paused in his story long enough to light another one of his tiny cigars he always smoked. I infer that Lord Duncan, the Duchess was scrupulous in the bestowal of titles, saw no more of ghosts after he was married. He never saw them at all, at any time, either before or since. But they came very near breaking off the match and thus breaking two young hearts. You don't mean to say that they knew that any just cause or impediment why they should not forever after hold their peace? Asked Dear Jones. How could a ghost, or even two ghosts, keep a girl from marrying the man she loved? This was baby Rensselaer's question. It seems curious, does it not? And Uncle Larry tried to warn himself by two or three sharp pulls of his fiery little cigarette. And the circumstances are quite as curious as the fact itself. You see, Miss Sutton wouldn't be married for a year after her mother's death, so she and Duncan had lots of time to tell each other all they knew. Eliphalet got to know a good deal about the girls she went to school with, and Kitty learned all about his family. He did not tell her about the title for a long time, as he wasn't one to brag. But he described to her a little old house in Salem, and one evening towards the end of summer, the wedding day had been appointed for early in September. She told him that she did not want a bridal tour at all. She just wanted to go down to the little old house in Salem to spend her honeymoon in peace and quiet, with nothing to do and nobody to bother them. Well, Eliphalet jumped at the suggestion. It suited him down to the ground. All of a sudden he remembered the spooks, and it knocked him all of a heap. He had told her about the Duncan Banshee, and the idea of the ancestral ghost in personal attendance on the husband tickled her immensely. But he had never said anything about the ghost which haunted the little house in Salem. He knew she would be frightened out of her wits if the house ghost revealed itself to her, and saw it at once it would be impossible to go to Salem on their wedding trip. So he told her all about it, and how whenever he went to Salem, the two ghosts interfered, gave dark seances, manifested and materialized, and made the place absolutely impossible. Kitty listened in silence, and Eliphalet, he thought she had changed her mind, but she hadn't done anything of the kind. Just like a man to think she was going to, remarked baby Van Rensselaer. She told him she could not bear ghosts herself, but she would not marry a man who was afraid of them. Just like a girl to be inconsistent, remarked Dear Jones. Uncle Larry's tiny cigar had been extinct. He lighted a new one and continued. Eliphalet protested in vain. Kitty made up her mind. Kitty said her mind was made up. She was determined to pass her honeymoon in the little old house in Salem, and she was equally determined not to go there as long as there were any ghosts there, until he could assure her that the spectral tenants had received notice to quit, and that there was no danger of manifestation and materialization. She refused to be married at all. She did not intend to have her honeymoon interrupted by two wrangling ghosts, and the wedding could be postponed until he made ready the house for her. She was an unreasonable young woman, said the Duchess. Well, that was Eliphalet's thought, much as he was in love with her, and he believed he could talk her out of her determination, but he couldn't. She was set. And when the girl is set, there is nothing to do but yield to the inevitable. And that's just what Elphalet did. He saw that he would either have to give her up or get the ghosts out. And as he loved her and did not care for the ghosts, he resolved to tackle the ghosts. He had clear grit, Elphalet had. He was half Scot and half Yankee, and neither bread turns tail in hurry. So he made his plans and went down to Salem. As he said goodbye to Kitty, he had an impression that she was sorry she had made him go, but she was kept it up bravely and put on a bold face on it and saw him off and went home and cried for an hour and was perfectly miserable until he came back the next day. Did he succeed in driving the ghosts away? Said Baby Van Rensselaer with great interest. That's just what I'm coming to, said Uncle Larry, pausing at a critical moment in a manner of a trained storyteller. You see, Elphalet had got to rather tough job, and he would gladly have had extension of time on the contract. But he had chosen between the girl and the ghost, and he wanted the girl. He tried to invent or remember some sort in an easy way with ghosts, but he couldn't. He wished he had somebody he could invented a specific for spooks. Something that would make the ghosts come out of the house and die in the yard. He wondered if he could not tempt the ghosts to run in debt so that he might get the sheriff to help him. He wondered also whether the ghosts would not be overcome with some strong drinks. A dissipated spook, a spook with delirium tremens, might be committed to an inebriated asylum. But none of these things seemed feasible. What did he do? Interrupted Dear Jones. The learned counsel will please speak to the point. You will regret this unseemly haste, said Uncle Larry gravely, when you know what really happened. What was it, Uncle Larry? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer. I'm all impatient. Uncle Larry proceeded. Elphalet went down to the little house in Salem, and as soon as the clock struck 12, the rival ghosts began wrangling before. Raps here and there and everywhere, ringing bells, banging tambourines, strumming banjos, sailing about the room, and all the other manifestations and materializations followed one another, just as they had the summer before. The only difference Elphalet could detect was a strong flavor in the spectral profanity. And this, of course, was only a vague impression, for he did not actually hear a single word. He waited a while in patience, listening and watching. Of course, he saw neither of the ghosts, because neither of them could appear to him. At last he got his dander up, and thought it was about time to interfere, so he rapped on the table and asked for silence. As soon as he felt the spooks were listening to him, he explained the situation to them. He told them he was in love, and he could not marry unless they vacated the house. He appealed to them as old friends, and he laid claim to their gratitude. The titular ghost had been sheltered by the Duncan family for hundreds of years, and the domiciliary ghost had free lodging in the little house at Salem for nearly 2 centuries. He implored them to settle their differences and to get him out of his difficulty at once. He suggested that they better fight it out then and there and see who was master. He had put down with him all the needful weapons. He pulled out his valise and spread out on the table a pair of Navy revolvers, a pair of shotguns, a pair of dueling swords, and a couple Bowie knives. He offered to serve as second for both parties, and he gave the word when it to begin. He also took out the valise, a pack of cards, and a bottle of poison, telling them that if they wished to avoid carnage, they might cut the cards, see which one take the poison. Then he waited anxiously for a reply. For a little space there was silence. Then he became conscious of a trembling shivering in one corner of the room, and he remembered that he had heard from that direction what sounded like a frightened sigh when he made the first suggestion of a duel. Something told him that this was the domiciliary ghost, and that it was badly scared. Then he was impressed by a certain movement in the opposite corner of the room, and as though the titular ghost there were drawing himself up with offended dignity. Eliphalet couldn't exactly see these things. Because he had never seen the ghosts but felt them. After a silence of nearly a minute, a voice came from the corner where the family ghost stood. A voice strong and full, but trembling slightly with suppressed passion. And this voice told Eliphalet it was plain enough that he did not have long be that he had not long been the head of the Duncans, and that he had never known properly considered the characteristics of the race, if now he supposed that one of his blood could draw his sword against a woman. Eliphalet said he had never suggested that the Duncan ghost should raise his hand against a woman, and all he wanted was that Duncan ghost should fight another ghost. And then the voice told Eliphalet that the other ghost was a woman. What? Said Dear Jones, sitting up suddenly. You didn't mean to tell me that the ghost which haunted the house was a woman? Those were the very words Eliphalet Duncan used, said Uncle Larry, but he did not need to wait for the answer. All at once he recalled the traditions of the domiciliary ghost and knew that what the titular ghost was in fact. He had never thought of the sex of a spook, but there was no doubt whatever the house ghost was a woman. No sooner was this firmly fixed in Eliphalet's mind than he saw his way out of the difficulty. The ghosts must be married, for then there would be no more interference, no more quarreling, no more manifestations or materializations, no more dark seances with their raps and bells and tambourines and banjos. At first, the ghosts would not hear of it. The voice in the corner declared that the Duncan wraith had never thought of matrimony. But Eliphalet argued with them, and pleaded and persuaded and coaxed, and dwelt on the advantages of matrimony. He had to confess, of course, that he did not know how to get a clergyman to marry them. But the voice from the corner gravely told him that there would be no difficulty in that regard, as there was no lack of spiritual chaplains. Then, for the first time, the house ghost spoke in a low, clear, gentle voice, with a quaint, old-fashioned New England accent, which contrasted sharply with the broad Scots speech of the family ghost. She said that Eliphalet Duncan seemed to have forgotten that she was married, but this did not upset Eliphalet at all. He remembered the whole case clearly, and he told her she was not a married ghost, but a widow, since her husband had been hung for murdering her. Then the Duncan ghost drew attention to the great disparity of their ages, saying that he was nearly 450 years old, and she was barely 200. But Eliphalet had not talked to juries for nothing. He just buckled to, and coaxed those ghosts into matrimony. Afterward, he came to the conclusion that they were willing to be coaxed, but at the time he thought he had pretty hard work to convince them the advantages of the plan. Did he succeed? Asked Baby Van Rensselaer with a young lady interest in matrimony. He did, said Uncle Larry. He talked to the wraith of the Duncans and the specter of the little old house of Salem into matrimonial engagement. And from that time they were engaged and had no more trouble with them. They were rival ghosts no longer. They were married by a spiritual chaplain the very same day that Alva Duncan met Kitty Sutton in front of the railing of Grace Church. The ghostly bride and the bridegroom went away at once to their bridal tour, and Lord and Lady Duncan went down to the little house at Salem to pass their honeymoon. Uncle Larry stopped. His tiny cigar was out again. The tale of the rival ghosts was told. The solemn silence fell on the little party on the deck of the ocean steamer, broken harshly by the hoarse roar of the fog horn. Now, I hope you guys like that. The Rival Ghosts by Brandon Mathers. I like the story. I thought that was a lot of fun. For those of us who have done paranormal investigations, you might say that idea didn't stand a ghost of a chance. Now, as much as I did promise you guys 2 stories tonight, that one took a full hour, and normally I don't want to drag you guys into an hour and a half of the show. So what we will do is in a few weeks we will continue and read the damn thing once again. The short story, I mean. And we will cut it off right here for the show. We will remind you guys, if you guys get a chance, to like and subscribe. We do appreciate it. We do indeed. Now, as I've said, we've got some big things coming in the next couple weeks. Next week, as I did promise on the New Year's Eve show last Wednesday, we have something very special for you. Something that became in public domain as of January 1st, 2026. Next week, on the Book Club Reading Room premiere from 1930s, we have Nancy Drew, reporter, Bonita of Granville in Franklin, Rhodes. And that will be part of the show. That will be the show next week. So we have it's not a very long movie. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. So it wasn't that long. It was a nice, fun little movie. But the reason we are doing that, because in 2 weeks, we will be celebrating our 3rd anniversary of this show. And on this show, in 3 weeks, we will continue the trend of mysteries to start out the new year. Because in 3 weeks, 2 weeks, the Book Club Reading Room premieres the Nancy Drew mystery, Secret of the Old Clock, the very first of the Nancy Drew mysteries. And we will be premiering that. The entire book broken down into segments onto the show in 2 weeks. And like I said, in next week, the movie based on the books, loosely based on the books, Nancy Drew Reporter. And there are other movies in the series. And so I'm going to check to see if those are available also. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live, the Book Club Reading Room, every single Sunday night right here on Twitch and YouTube. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who stopped in last Wednesday for New Year's Eve. Thank you. Thank you very much for stopping in. Thank you for being a part of this show, the craziness, the fun, the storytelling. these are the stories that we want to share with you. And you guys are always welcome to follow along. So in a couple of weeks when we do the first Nancy Drew book, you guys can rent it off of Libby, borrow it off of Libby, go to some other location and get, if you have the books, read along with us. This is what this is supposed to be about for everybody. Before we go tonight, a reminder, we do have a new email. JoelK_OG at protonmail.com. Give us a yell. Let me know where you guys are watching from. If you guys know of any books that you think are in public domain you'd like me to try to read this year, let me know. We do have in mid-March, if we can arrange it in time, we've got a long book coming up. And it's one that most of you may have read or seen the movies. We will be reading for the first time here on the show all the chapters in sequential order of The Secret Garden. But before we go, I have a final quote for the night, something we did on Wednesday night for the anniversary show. And something I want to share with you guys once again. Everyone comes with baggage. Find someone who loves you enough to help you unpack. And those doubts, fears, and loss we all carry, I do. Turning another year a couple days ago, I understand some of that very, very well. To everybody who watches in from around the country, around the world, everyone comes with baggage. Find someone who loves you enough to help you unpack. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Every Sunday night, live here, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, here on Twitch, and then we transfer the program over to YouTube. Be well, be safe, be kind. Take care, you guys. Have a really good week this week. For those of you with really lousy weather coming, be careful. Drive safe. And come on back next week for a Nancy Drew mystery movie. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.